r/AskReddit by Planet Reddit. Teachers of Reddit. What is the biggest holy shit red flag of any kind you've seen from a student? NSFW. When I taught ESL in Korea, I had a student who was a rage addict. He was about 11 years old and this kid was grumpy like an old man. He would hunch his shoulders and put his head down like some grumpy old codger. Usually about once a month. He would lose his shit over something. And it was a volcano that would erupt for 20 solid minutes. He would totally lose his shit. Attack anybody who got near him. And would have no respect at all for adults. I watched an older grandfather, somebody you totally respect in that culture, try to talk to him and the kid wouldn't back down. And in fact got even more angry until the grandfather lost it with him. The kid had serious anger issues. I would see the emotions rise in him over the course of the month break between fits and I could tell when it was about time for him to fly into a rage and explode. Another kid I taught came from a poorer family where the husband and wife constantly fought. His father was an alcoholic and his mother was a snide, angry woman who ran a small produce stand in the neighborhood market. The kid was purposefully belligerent towards authority in such a way you just never see in Korea. Every adult I knew would just scratch their heads because they never understood him or how to reach him. I tried everything I knew how to do in order to get through to him, somehow bond with him so I could teach him. Or at least keep him from disrupting the entire class. Even the other kids got tired of his shit. But I knew it wasn't his fault and I felt bad for him. So I did what I could to show him kindness because I don't think he ever got much of that at home. I teach in an area that has been very affected by the opioid epidemic. I taught a student who was well known to be addicted to heroin. He was also the person who gave his mother her first dose of the drug. His mother died of an overdose. The last time I saw him he had self-tattooed on his arm "I killed my mom" in huge letters. Out of all the crazy shit I've read in this thread so far, this one hit the hardest. Damn, that sounds super emotionally ducked. During my 20 years in the same school, it was just getting worse and worse. Citywide, administrators were shifting accountability onto the teachers in order to preserve their own careers. This was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. After this I knew that teaching, or trying to be a teacher in Nick schools, was no longer worth the struggle for me. While I was supervising a class, not mine, during pack up, clean up at the end of the day, I caught two 7-year-old boys on the floor hiding behind some furniture. One was giving a blowjob to the other boy. Shocked and disturbed, I reported it to my principal and was simply told to call the parents. Incredulous, I asked what I should say. How should I handle this? Why me? Am I to do this alone? I was directed to be vague about it, and if I wasn't vague and an investigation resulted, then I would be thrown under the bus because it must have only happened on my watch. Of course. The two boys were notoriously strange troublemakers for everyone. But nothing prior to this went on record. No one could make the case that the principal had neglected to protect other children from these boys. When one of these boys picked at the gums in his mouth with his fingernails until his mouth was filled with blood and his smile scared the other kids, and his hands were covered in drying blood, he was sent to the nurse to wash his hands and rinse his mouth. The nurse sent him back to class with a note. The parents were told, but acted like it's just another day. Edit. A word. Jesus Christ. That principal is terrible. There's no way to hold a teacher responsible for two kids out of probably 30 who snuck off. Also, you caught them, so it's not like you let it happen. I would have called CPS and ducked out of there before they could fire me. That's what I did, actually. Student skipped the week or two that he had pool time at pay. Cancelled his parents at conferences he was exhibiting some gang tendencies. Oddly, so were the parents. Found out later that year he skipped pool pay class because he had his last name tattooed across his back in Old English. This was a 14-year-old. Duck. I'm guessing you guys are in a gang-heavy area? I know that seems like a dumb question. I only ask because I'm in a ruralish southern area. And I could still see that happening with kids who have methed out parents. I had a student last week tell me to hold out my hand because he had a surprise for me. I did it out of curiosity and he placed a 9mm round in my hand. This is 2 months after I had a student tell everyone via Snapchat he was gonna shoot me and another teacher up. I just shook my head and called administration to deal with that BS. I had a student earlier this year who came to me because he was kicked out of his last school, according to him. He was covered in tattoos as a freshman in high school. On the second day of having him in my class, I looked up from my desk while students were supposed to be taking a test to see him miming cutting off my head with something shiny. When I went back to see what it was and he laughed and hid it, swearing he had nothing. I looked up to see him doing it again. Same thing happened. I let it go. After he left the room, I found the pen he had been writing with under his desk with 2 small incisions in the cap. I immediately reported it to admin. He was moved to another teacher a few days later for an unrelated scheduling issue. He threatened to kill her. He was moved to another teacher because of this. In the third teacher's class, he drew pictures of rifles all over his essays. So many red flags. He was finally sent to the alternative school a few months back. But he'll likely be back. Edit. To clarify, the incisions on the pen indicated that he was using some kind of sharp object, a thumbtack. I suspect, to mime cutting my head off. And yes, we have documented and reported these things every step of the way. I was a school resource officer, and one of the kids told me that they do things like this to get sent to the alternative school. Their friends are also at the school, and the workload is so much lower there. This year I had a female student, middle school, who had cut her arm so many times you couldn't really see the skin. Just a bunch of bloody, scabby cuts. She hid it well at school as it was winter and the students were all wearing sweaters. We only found out because one of her friends started crying and told me I needed to talk to her immediately. Yeah, this is so sad. When I was in middle school there was a girl who would always have a ton of cuts. Not even just on her wrists. It was on her hands and everything too, and she would just tell people I don't know how these got here. I think my cat scratches me in my sleep. I felt awful looking back a couple of years later that we all just ignored it when it was so obviously self-harm. Which we should have recognized by that point. My friend runs a swim club for kids. She once got a complaint from some mothers that one 8-year-old boy was performing fellatio on some 6-year-old boys in the changing room. The kid wasn't allowed to come back. And it turns out that his grandfather molested him. That's where he learned the whole thing. This happened to me in kindergarten. Nap time was the worst because we had to pick spots on the ground with our blankets and this one boy would follow me around until I found a spot and lay down next to me. Then he'd ask me to kiss his wiener and try to kiss me too. The teacher would just yell at me to hurry up and pick a spot, but I was trying to get away from him the whole time. I finally told my mom and my parents told the teacher. Turns out another girl left this school because of the same problem with this boy. The school basically told us there's nothing they could do and that my parents could send me to a new school if they wanted. And that's the story of how I started going to private school. Don't know what happened to that kid, but looking back it's clear something wasn't right at home for him to know that stuff and act on it. Edit. This was 1996 to 1997 for everyone curious. I still remember the details very vividly. It was straight up like this 5-year-old kid wanted to have oral sex with me. I know his name but googling it doesn't help. I'd like to think this hasn't affected me in any major way. I mostly feel bad for him because he had to learn that somewhere. There was nothing they could do. WTF. That sounds like they were either being terribly irresponsible or covering abuse. Oh. Finally a thread where I can tell that story. It happened a few years ago. When I was an intern at a big school in my town. My job was simple. Follow the teacher wherever she went and complete 100 H of unpaid work. That's it. Shitty. But I had to do that in order to get my diploma. So, there was this boy, around 14, who was always alongside his personal therapist. I don't usually ask questions. But since that same teacher was my high school teacher years ago, I felt comfortable in asking her what was wrong with him. She said he had autism. And sometimes he would get aggressive towards his classmates. So his therapist had to be with him at all times while he was at school to help calm him down if something or someone triggers him. Days later I went to the teacher's room to ask for signatures for my internship documents. Everyone is helpful and starts signing until the coordinator walks in and asks for our attention. Guys, I have some news to tell you all about. Boy, you'd better sit down. You too. Spirit song. You gotta listen to this. She said. Turns out the ducking kid had been pretending to be autistic for years. He looked up on the internet for the symptoms of autism and just started using his acting skills to fool even a psychologist and his whole family. His therapist had empty eyes. His mother looked like her son died in front of her. I don't know the details, but it seems a different psychologist did something to him and caught him off guard, discovering his ruse. What do you gain from pretending to be autistic in like the 8th grade? As far as I know, he had some special permissions with that. He could leave classroom whenever he wanted, and didn't do tests if he didn't feel like. I think he just skipped many important exams and the school had to replace them with some way easier activities. It's pretty clear that the school was absolutely unprepared for this kind of student, and he just kept going on with that after no one caught him. Had them producing a book report with a few sentences and some pictures. Kid had an abridged version of some Penguin classic. And everything was good barring one question. What did you enjoy most about this story? He gets mad and kills his family. Followed by scrolling image of mutilation. Completely unrelated to the story and just slipped in there with some good work. Source. Wife is a teacher. 8th grader would smear his own shit on the restroom walls. Threatened to rape my wife in the comment section on her classroom YouTube channel. Rookie mistake using your real name as your username. When called out for it, parents lawyered up and said no one could ever prove his account wasn't hacked, so we had no way of knowing it was him. Later my wife found a note near her classroom door in his handwriting saying he was going to shoot up the school and that he already knew where everyone was going to hide. School went on lockdown and he was later found hiding in the woods behind the soccer fields. When questioned about it he said he ran because he was scared. I could go on. Kid will likely shoot up his high school. No one could ever prove his account wasn't hacked. That's not how it works. And his parents will keep claiming how their kid is innocent and misunderstood. When I first began teaching, we had a student who seemed to get a lot of satisfaction out of manipulating or hurting others. Her behavior escalated, leading to a brief hospital stint after killing her puppy. When she returned to school, she bragged gleefully about it and shortly thereafter began writing death threats in blood on the walls of bathroom stalls. As much as I hate to say it, she's one I wouldn't be surprised to see in the news in a few years. That's horror movie stuff right there. University. Freshman tried to add my class late, but all the slots allotted by admin had been filled. He approached me after the first day of class and asked to be added anyway. Very flat affect. No emotion at all. I told him that I couldn't add him, and he replied, "If you don't add me, I'll follow you everywhere. Even to the bathroom." I'm not a huge guy, but I easily doubled his body weight. Not the situation to try to make a threat, I'd say. I was nonplussed for a moment. So I asked him to repeat what he just said. And he did. Word for word. He did. I could tell this guy was a nutcase. And in hindsight I probably should have reported the incident. Instead, I just kind of laughed it off and walked away. Never saw him again. To my knowledge. Kinda doubt that he made a smooth transition into adulthood. Though. There was a kid I knew in 2nd grade, he was wild. When we were in the same class together, the teacher would regularly have to call the assistance team, a group of teachers that would restrain unruly kids and were trained on how to do so. He would throw desks, chairs, scissors once if remember correctly. The following year, we weren't in the same classroom but it was a small school so you'd still hear about things. He tripped a very pregnant teacher causing her to go into labor. No idea how he didn't get expelled for that, but the final straw was when he found a rusty pocket knife on the playground during recess and stabbed a student sitting next to him in the stomach with it for no reason. Still wonder what happened to him. Oh, and he sucked his thumb regularly. Edit. Assistance team. I meant assistance team. Why does it take so much to get a student expelled? Why do districts insist on endangering the kids that don't act out by not expelling the students that are disruptive? injure teachers and their babies, and stab students. On the other end of the spectrum, a child gets suspended, expelled for making his fingers look like a gun or pretends to use a bow and arrow. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for 3 videos a day.